Regulus Quarterly Financial Astrology Forecast by William Stickevers.
So let's take a look at the chart of the People's Republic of China for October 1st, 1949. And what I'm noting here is the Saturn-Neptune World Point conjunction, which will be directly impacted by the Uranus-Pluto sextile midpoint, and that will all be occurring on August 12, 2025. So when we look at this combination here, the Uranus-Pluto sextile midpoint will be exactly on the World Point, conjunct the natal moon, conjunct Saturn, conjunct Neptune on August 12, 2025. And that's going to be like an inflection point with the global markets. And this certainly concerns China in particular, because at the same time that that's happening, we're seeing that this triple alignment on the World Point will be making a direct hit on the Chinese sun, while transiting Pluto sits right on the Chinese ascendant, conjunct its natal moon. So basically the big thing here is the fact that the Uranus-Pluto is hitting the midpoint of this triple alignment, the stellium, on the World Point that's directly opposing the Chinese sun. And transiting Pluto is basically going retrograde stationing on the Chinese ascendant and natal moon. Now, when we look at the black box projecting out for 2025, this is what we see for China. It's basically causing major turmoil. China's strategic position is weakening. It's looking to stabilize its internal economy. It's trying to force the valuation of the yuan. And the valuation is going to only weaken confidence in Chinese assets, discouraging foreign investments. And as China continues to devalue its currency, it will lose global investor confidence. People will no longer invest. When I say investor confidence, they'll no longer outsource their factories, right? They'll be leaving China. They'll be going elsewhere. They're going to be shifting capital flows back to the U.S. This is exactly what Trump is doing, right? This is exactly what his plan is. And this is not just his plan. This has been brewing for a while. This will create a perception that China is risky to align with, to do business with, encouraging countries to pivot trade and diplomacy toward the U.S. So as China becomes less investable, the U.S. becomes more attractive, a deliberate asymmetry engineered by the Trump administration through policy. That is the plan. And if we know the Chinese property sector is already in crisis since 2021, when Evergrande failed, right? We're seeing massive slowdowns with a deepening crisis that's affected property sales. Properties and real estate is 35% of their economy, not manufacturing, real estate. So we see the potential for financial contagions with shadow financial institutions in China. We're seeing local governments that are reliant on land sale revenues collapse, and we're seeing social and political pressures. So we're basically seeing a breakdown in China, the end of China's rise, reversal of rapid economic growth, resource depletion, mounting debt and capital inefficiency, demographic collapse, domestic repression and centralization. Factors that once propelled China's rise, like geopolitical security, market reform, demographic dividends, all that stuff has basically imploded. And we see geopolitical isolation and trade barriers. And as a result, China is acting more aggressive. There's a massive expansion of military capabilities and assertive action in disputed regions in the South China Sea with Taiwan, which are not only straining resources within China, but also increasing geopolitical tensions with the United States that could lead to further disruptive economic growth. So the main thing you need to keep in mind is that the U.S.-China trade war goes beyond tariffs. It's a monetary global power struggle, right? This goes down to the fact that China has been layering the foundation for the next world gold standard. Their plan was by the mid-2020s or late 2020s to roll out a yuan gold-backed global reserve currency. And for decades, they have been accumulating gold, producing and hoarding it to reclaim monetary dominance. And, you could see this here where officially China holds 2,000 tons of gold, but the real estimate suggests 20 to 30,000 tons, pointing to a long-term gold-based strategy. Now, this is very much connected with what happened with China if you go back to 1873. So in July of 1873, during the Saturn-Uranus opposition, a turning point in monetary history was marked when the international gold standard commenced after the German Empire decided to transition its strategic reserves from silver to the German gold mark. The pivotal move influenced European nations, including the United States, by its Coin Act in 1873 to follow suit, leading to the widespread adoption of the gold standard in the late 19th century. And the Chinese Qing dynasty decided to remain on the silver standard. So prior to 1873, the strategic reserve of banks and governments throughout the world was silver, right? Starting 1873, everyone switched over, but the Chinese decided to remain with the silver standard. And as a result of the global monetary shift from silver to gold, silver depreciated by 30% relative to after having been traded at exchanges for over the past 100 years. So relative to gold, it lost 30% of its value. However, it wasn't until 1933 that China finally abandoned silver. However, it was too late to retain influence. So this is a big mistake China made, and it looks like China is making that mistake again, and let me explain why. So what's happening right now? We see a monetary evolution. Bitcoin was rolled out in 2008 during the great financial crisis, and the monetary evolution transitioned from gold to fiat money, now into digital money, right? So here's the evolution of Bitcoin. White paper comes out 2008. The genesis moment begins in 2009. And between 2009 and 2013, Bitcoin was initially dismissed as magic internet money. Then it became a store of value. Bitcoin gained recognition post-Great Financial Crisis, with official endorsements increasing post-2017 when it surpassed the price of gold and when Bitcoin reached $20,000 per Bitcoin. Then it became a medium of exchange, where Bitcoin became a global currency as infrastructure and institutional trust grew, right? We saw Bitcoin exchanges proliferate throughout the world. And this was marked by the COVID-19's financial impact, with low interest rate environments and massive monetary stimulus, where we saw major players like BlackRock, Fidelity, Tesla, MicroStrategy enter the Bitcoin markets. And now nation states such as El Salvador, it was back in 2021, made it a core asset, and the United States began its Bitcoin strategic reserves as of January 2025 and began to integrate it into its regulatory framework. So what's happening here is China is making the same mistake it made back in 1873 when it's been buying, up to 30,000 tons of gold for the purpose of backing a Chinese yuan world reserve currency and making that the means and forms of all trade settlements for all of the countries that are favored trade nations, which is 80% of the countries in the world. That has been their plan. Bitcoin, the rise of Bitcoin, means that there's a monetary evolution going on, with Bitcoin's entering its institutional adoption phase, which started in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. And when you compare Bitcoin to gold, what do we see? Bitcoin is performing well compared to gold, up 400% within a similar time frame. So if you just look, Bitcoin is up 400% since November 2022. And if you price gold to Bitcoin instead of US dollars, how much Bitcoin would you have to spend if you bought gold with Bitcoin, right? Gold continues to bleed against Bitcoin, meaning if you swapped your Bitcoin to buy gold starting in 2011, you would have lost money. Think of it this way. How much is gold in Bitcoin? And if the graph goes down, that means gold is going down compared to Bitcoin. And the fact of the matter is that the purchasing power of gold against Bitcoin is going down substantially. This is important because what's happening here is that the U.S. is saying we are moving away from the gold standard to the Bitcoin strategic standard. And this is similar to what is happening with China. China basically had massive silver reserves in 1873 and said, we're not going to switch over to gold. We're going to stick with the silver standard. They took a massive hit. 30% of their strategic reserves went down. By the way, that dynasty collapsed. And what resulted from that? Revolution that resulted in communist China. So the trade war really is on the tip of the surface. It's more about monetary global power struggle, right? China banned Bitcoin 13 times since 2012. Despite holding over 60% of Bitcoin's mining power, China banned Bitcoin mining in 2019 and pushed it overseas, a strategic blunder. Majority of Bitcoin being mined now is in the United States. Unlike gold, China didn't retain control of this asset, allowing the U.S. to take the lead. So China saying, hey, we're anti-Bitcoin because we're stacking gold. And now the U.S. hosts a majority of the Bitcoin hash rate, having become the main destination for mining operations following China's 2021 crackdown. So the Trump administration embraced Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, reinforcing U.S. dominance in a new digital monetary era. The Trump tariffs are a distraction from the real war about control of the global monetary system. Bitcoin adoption equals global reserve positioning, just like gold before the Bretton Woods conference in 1944. So the big announcement that came out this week during the time of the eclipse, by the way, was that the White House says gold reserves can be used to purchase Bitcoin, which is a paradigm shifting development where the federal gold reserves will be allowed to purchase Bitcoin, as stated by Bo Hines, executive director of the President's Council of Advisors on Digital Assets. And this aligns with the Bitcoin Act of 2025, introduced by Senator Cynthia Lummis, which proposes the U.S. government acquire up to 1 million Bitcoin, approximately 5% of the total supply of Bitcoin on the exchanges worldwide over the next 5 years. So there's massive strategic implications going on here. So using profits from gold holding sidesteps, direct taxation, new debt issuance, we're basically seeing a global positioning where the U.S. establishing itself as a leading Bitcoin superpower, shifting reserve composition away from fiat and precious metals, such as gold, which it holds 8,000 metric tons of, and influencing other governments, especially BRIC nations, to follow suit or react competitively. So the U.S.-China trade war goes beyond tariffs because this moment mirrors 1873. A global monetary shift is happening again. You could see where what Trump is doing with the tariffs, prompting over 50 countries to renegotiate trade, which is unveiling a deeper monetary conflict. So basically, this is going to play out the same time we see more intensification between the trade war and currency war that's currently happening now with China. All right, so what does this mean? It means the United States is shaping the next century of power. We are living through a pivotal moment in monetary history. Owning Bitcoin equals front running, right? And wealth consolidation before the world catches on.
To watch the full forecast webinar and gain in-depth astrological insights on global markets, key economic events, and investment strategies, go to williamstickevers.com and register for the Regulus Quarterly Financial Astrology Forecasts today.